Hello everyone. A very good morning. Okay, let us check if we are live and also if the audio is clear. Sorry about that. I was just checking the audio. मुझे नहीं पता था ऐड आ जाएगा. All right, this seems to be fine. So our audio absolutely seems to be fine now. The live chat is open, so just in case you have doubt while I'm teaching, you can definitely ask in the live chat. Okay, I've kept it open, so I'll be looking at it once I explain a particular topic, and then we can move about from there. Okay. So, alright, guys, let's start with our lecture today. So, yesterday I was telling you about travelers in India, right? And I was also telling you about why they are important. So we have so far discussed Hyun Tsang. Then yesterday we discussed a little bit about Al-Biruni, and we also had to start discussing about Ibn Battuta, right? So I will be starting with Ibn Battuta once again today, a little bit introduction, so that it goes on in a continuation. Okay. So as I told you about Ibn Battuta, he was a Moroccan traveler born in Tangier, and he was born into a respectable family, and his family was an expert. They were an expert in what? They were an expert in Islamic religious law. They were an expert in Sharia. Fine. And Ibn Battuta has been known as a globe-trotter. What do you mean by a globe-trotter? A person who loves to travel, or a person who has traveled almost the entire globe. जिसको कहते हैं ना world traveler. That's what actually Ibn Battuta was. We will be taking a look at his travels in the next slide, and I will be giving you a flowchart as to where all he traveled. Fine. So before he had set to India, that was in 1332-33, he had already traveled to a lot of places like Turkey, Syria, Yemen, Mecca, Medina, Persia, Africa. So he has traveled to all of these places before he came to India. Alright, even before he came to India, he has traveled to all of these places. Okay. Now, then what happened? From central India, he came to Sindh. Okay. I'll just keep writing it so that it's clearer to you. Fine. So from So from central India, he came to where? He came to Sindh. Fine. Why did he come to Sindh? Because he had heard of a person called, he had heard of a sultan called Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Okay. He had heard about him, that he was a great patron of art and literature. Okay. What was he? He was a great patron of art and literature, and he wanted. Let me just do this. Okay, so he had heard of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He was a sultan of Delhi, and he had heard that he was a great patron of arts and literature, and hence Ibn Battuta had gone to meet him. And Muhammad bin Tughlaq was also really impressed by Ibn Battuta and his scholarship, and he was appointed as the judge or Qazi of Delhi. Fine. So who did he meet? He met Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Okay. And he appointed, so Ibn Battuta was appointed as what? He was appointed as the Qazi of Delhi, or he was appointed as the judge of Delhi. Okay. So he was appointed as the judge of Delhi, and for a long period he did enjoy the confidence of the king, but then there was a little bit of fallout between them, because it was believed that Ibn Battuta was conspiring against the king. He then did fall out of favor, and he was thrown into prison, but then the misunderstanding cleared, and then he was restored back to his position. And after that he was sent to China to the Mongol ruler is the envoy. Envoy is like a messenger or a Rajdoot of the Sultan. Fine. And from here his travels are going to begin. So where all did he travel? So if you could just take a look at this particular map here, you can see the travels that he has done. Okay, from he's traveled to all of these places. Okay, so he starts from Tangier, he goes to Timbuktu, then he moves on to Alexandria, then from Mecca, then he goes on to Mombasa, Samarkand, Calicut, and then he from Singapore to Beijing. All of these places he has traveled. Okay, so what was his traveling like? Let me just draw a brief flowchart for you. So basically, from central India, so he was being sent to where? He was being sent to China. Okay, so from central India, proceeding from central India, he goes on to where? Fine. Proceeding from central India, he goes on to the Malabar coast. Okay, from Malabar he goes on to where? He goes on to Maldives. Then he goes on to Sri Lanka. I hope I'm writing it correct. Yes. Then from Sri Lanka he goes back. All right. He goes back to these places. So I'm drawing a two arrow here. That he goes back to this and to this. Okay. Fine. Fine. So he goes back to Maldives and then he goes back to Malabar coast as well. Fine. And then he again proceeded to where? From there he proceeded to China once again. And from there he visited Bengal. Then Assam, and then he traveled widely and again back to China, where he traveled badly. He traveled a lot in almost till Beijing. He traveled as far as Beijing, and he had reached the Zaitun port in China, the Chinese port, which is the Zaitun port in China. So that's all about his travels. You can see he has traveled a lot. I've also made you a little flowchart here, and I've given you a picture here, so I don't think it would be that difficult for you to remember. You don't need to remember this entire thing. You can just remember the flowchart from where all did he travel, and all of that you can remember. Okay? So let me know if you have any doubts till here. And these two slides, अभी तक हमने जितना भी किया है, I think we have done first, second and third slide. So if you have any doubts in here, you can just let me know. कुछ भी ऐसा जो आपको नहीं समझ में आया है, आप मुझे ज़रूर बता सकते हैं. लाइव चैट बिल्कुल ओपन है गाइज, आप देख लीजिए, एक बार अच्छे से समझ लीजिए. कुछ भी नहीं समझ में आया है, इफ़ यू नॉट अंडरस्टूड समथिंग, यू आर मोर देन वेलकम टू आस्क मी. Alright, let's move ahead. Now, Ibn Battuta has been called a globetrotter for a reason, right? We've already discussed all the ways, all the places that he has traveled to. Okay? So we have already discussed how good he was at traveling, and best part about him was that whenever he traveled, he recorded some very minuscule things about the society, about the cultures, the values, beliefs. So when you just look at his account of India, he has recorded some very minuscule things which we might ignore because we see them on a daily basis. So things like pan and coconut have been described very beautifully. Why? Because it was very fascinating for him. We ignore it because we see it on a daily basis. We don't really pay attention to such things because they are very common for us, right? But it might not have been very common for him, and that is one of the reasons why he had mentioned such things in his book. Okay. Now, obviously, when Ibn Battuta was traveling at that time was really hazardous. It was not safe. At the same time, it was also very tedious. Why tedious? Because it took a lot of days to travel. So here you have a few examples which you must remember. So you can see here what he's saying, that it took 40 days to travel from Multan to Delhi. Fine. 50 days from Sindh to Delhi. Okay. And the distance from Daulatabad to Delhi, Daulatabad is in Maharashtra, is covered in 40 days, while Delhi to Gwalior took 10 days. So you can see how much time consuming is traveling actually, isn't it? But he was traveling even in that scenario. He loved to travel a lot, and that is why in a true sense he can be called as a globe trotter. That even though it was hazardous, it was not really comfortable, it was tedious, he was still traveling so much, right? So that's something really important here. All right. Now, traveling at that time was also very insecure because the highways on the roads which you travel, they were not really safe. Okay, they were not really safe in the sense. So Ibn Battuta, who had been attacked by a band of robbers several times, he has lost his companions while he was traveling. Okay, and while he was traveling from Multan to Delhi, so his caravan was attacked. Many of his fellow travelers, they lost their lives. Those who survived, Ibn Battuta did survive, but he was severely wounded. So this is telling us about the hazardous way in which he was traveling, and why he was actually why he was an actual globetrotter. Why should we call him an actual globetrotter? So that's something really important that we should be understanding about him. And the two things here we have to understand is that he was actually a globetrotter who traveled in a very hazardous situation, and traveling took a lot of time. 40, 50, 60 days was like the minimum amount. Fine. And another important thing we have to know about him is that how he recorded things. He recorded things in the most meticulous manner possible, in the most detailed manner possible, and he would even record things जिस पे हम शायद दोबारा ध्यान भी ना दे, where we don't really pay attention to it. Okay, so that's about it. Okay, let me know if you have doubts still here. All right. Now, let's talk about what Ibn Battuta has to say about India. So he did mention, so first of all, let me tell you about his mention of pan and coconut. So for coconut, he has described it as a human being. Why? Why is a human being? Because if you look at a coconut, you will see that it has two eyes almost, right? It has a very hairy structure, and when you open it, it's very hard on the outside, but when you open it, it's very soft in the inside. So he's described as a human being, who's trying to have a tough exterior but has a very soft and mushy interior. And then he has described it to be having 2 eyes, a hairy structure, so like that. And then how he has described pan, he's described the entire process of making pan, that you take the beetle leaf, all right, you put tuna on it, you put katha on it, and then you put gulkand on it, then you put nuts on it, erica nuts, supari dalte hain uske upar, then you fold it and you put it in your mouth, all right. It's very tasty after residue that you get, fine. So this is how he has described, the meticulous processes, some things which even we might ignore, okay. But his major contribution comes from the fact about how he has described the Indian cities, how he has described the trade that was happening in India, fine. And he has also described about a unique system of education, a unique system of communication. So that's all we will be talking about, okay. So let's talk about what he is saying about the Indian cities. Now, according to him, Indian cities were full of opportunities for those who had the necessary drive and for those who basically wanted to work, for those who had the skills. Now, most of these cities were densely populated and they were very prosperous, fine. In fact, how do we know that they were prosperous? Because Ibn Battuta mentions that the markets were full of goods, all right. The crowds in the streets were with bright and colorful markets, and they would be stacked with a wide variety of goods, fine. Delhi, according to him, was the largest market in India, and followed by Daulatabad, which is in Maharashtra. So Indian cities, jahan tak Indian cities ki baat hai, you can see here that the economy is actually very boosting. So from Indian cities only, we get to know a lot about other stuff, right? We get to know about, let me just write it down for you. Okay, so here we're getting to know about the markets, fine. We are getting to know about markets के बारे में हमें पता चल रहा है, right? Apart from that, we are also getting to know about what? Apart from market, we are also getting to know about the economy of the place. We are getting to know about the goods that was being sold in the markets, fine. So all of these things, and also we're getting to know about the population, right? So what is all of these things telling us? All of these things are telling us about what? About the people of India. They're telling us about the economy of India. They're telling us about the markets of India, particularly Delhi and Daulatabad, right? So we're getting to know a lot actually, okay? Alright. Let me know if you have doubts still here. Let's do a few more slides and then we can clear the doubts together. Let's talk about the economic transactions that he is talking about. Now, he is saying that according to him, these places or markets were not just places of economic transaction, but they were also a social and cultural hub. Okay? Why? Because most of the markets have, a certain place designated for performers. There would be dancers, musicians, singers, right? So it was not just a place of economic transaction, but also a place of cultural exchange. Okay? Now he is not really concerned with telling us about the prosperity of the towns, fine, but the way he has described the towns, fine, but the way he has described the towns, the way he's talked about the goods in the towns, it is very clear that the towns were actually very prosperous. Okay? And what have the historians used his account in? The historians have used his account to come to the conclusion that most of the stuff that we were using was actually coming from the villages, fine. Why from the villages were they coming from the villages? In the sense here, see what is happening. So the villages would be producing a lot of stuff, right? They would have a lot of surplus. Now these surplus only, the extra material, would make its way into the markets of India or into the markets of the town, and that is where we will be buying all of this stuff. Okay? And according to him, so when we're talking about surplus, again we get to know something else here. We get to know that Indian agriculture was actually quite profitable, was quite lucrative, was quite productive, and according to Ibn Battuta, it was productive enough to grow 2 crops in a year, right? So 2 crops is a minimum of 2 crops. It could be 4 crops as well. Like for example, Calcutta, Bengal alone was growing around 50 variety of rice alone. So it could be more than 2 crops, but yes, the farmers were allowed to grow a minimum of 2 crops. Okay. So what all do we know about Indian cities? We get to know about the markets, we get to know about how economically strong they were, because there was a wide variety of goods and people were buying these goods, fine. We get to know about how populated they were. We also get to know that they were places of cultural transaction with dancers, musicians and singers. And even though Ibn Battuta does not directly describe the economy of the place, it is an important part, it is an important source of history for us to understand it. Okay? And then he also tells us about the agriculture, which was very, very, very productive. Okay. Now, just take a look at all the doubts that you might have and let me know if you have any. Please take a look at all the doubts, all the points. Let me know if you have any doubts. Okay, chilling. Alright, let's move ahead now. Okay. Now we'll be talking about how he has described the trade. See guys, when we're talking about India being very economically strong and the villagers producing a lot of surplus and all of these surplus making their way into the towns and the cities, right? He also noted down this is something which is happening within the subcontinent, right? There must have been something happening beyond the subcontinent as well, right? So let's see what he's talking about, what he's telling us about trade. So he noted the subcontinent was well connected through inter-Asian networks of trade. What do you mean by that? Fine. So basically we have trade networks with West Asia, Southeast Asia, and all of these things, all of the products that we were selling there, it did fetch us a lot of profit for the artisans and for the merchants particularly. Okay? So what is happening here? So there is a lot of connectivity. So what do we see here? We see that India had a lot of trade network connections with West Asia and Southeast Asia, particularly the artisanal products that we were selling. They were in great demand. So what all were in great demand? So textile industry, right? Our textile industry was in great demand, particularly cotton cloth, okay, fine muslin. So cotton clothes, fine muslin, silk, brocade, satin, all of these things were in great demand. Now these are very expensive cloth nowadays. If you go to buy them, ये बहुत ही महंगे हैं, but at that point of time they were being produced and they were being sold outside of India. ठीक है? Now Batuta informs us that certain varieties of fine muslin were so expensive that they could only be worn by the nobles and the very rich. So as I told you, they are really expensive things that we're talking about here. So all of these things were being produced in India itself, and then they were being sold outside. They were being sold outside of the subcontinent. Okay. So what all have we learned? So India had inter-Asian trade relations. Okay. Then what else? Then we learnt about the goods that were being sold. So what all inter-Asian trade relations? So West Asia, and we had good trade relations with Southeast Asia. What all are the goods that we were selling? Cotton, muslin, brocade. Okay. These were some of the goods that were in huge demand. Okay, so that's about the trade that Ibn Battuta tells us about. Okay, so just take a look at the doubts that you might have. Okay, chali, let's move ahead. Now we will be talking about, okay, so I'm so sorry guys, we'll be talking about a unique system of communication. यहाँ पे मैंने थोड़ी सी गलती कर दी है, so I just correct it here. This is going to be communication, not education. I have made a mistake here. I'm sorry about that. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I've made a mistake here. So it has to be a unique system of communication. Now, see, Ibn Battuta was a globe-trotter, right? He was literally traveling to all of the places, fine. So what are we talking about here? So when he was traveling to so many places, obviously he is going to tell us about the unique system of communication that was there in India. So whenever he was traveling, he has told us that most of the trade routes or the trade routes that he was traveling in, they were supplied with inns and guest houses. What are inns? Inns are like hotels where you can stay overnight, and then there would be guest houses. Now the postal system was also very efficient. Let me explain about the postal system. I'm sure you've heard about the relay races, right? Okay, I'm sure you've heard about the relay races. Okay, so let's talk about how the postal system was. The postal system was actually quite good. So postal system was also like the relay races. So suppose there would be horses stationed at like small distances. So suppose there is horses, one horse is here, the other horse is here, and the other horse is here. Okay, so suppose I have given my message to A. So A is going to run with the horse like a short distance. They're going to run from here to here, hand it over to B, and then B would run from here to here and then hand it over to C. Now because these are short distances, it is easier for the horse to run at full speed and cover that distance in a very short period of time. Fine. This is how the postal system was working, and it was actually very fast. Fine. How do we know it was very fast? The postal system was so efficient that it took 50 days for a human being to reach from Delhi to Sindh, but the news report just reached in 5 days. Imagine, 50 and 5. There was a huge difference here, isn't it? बहुत बड़ा difference है ये, right? So postal system was from very efficient. So efficient that it literally took 5 days for any messages to travel from Delhi to Sindh. Alright. Now, the postal system was really efficient, particularly for the merchants, because suppose they're traveling a long distance, they are at some other place selling their stuff, and suppose they run out of a particular thing and there's a lot of demand for that particular thing, they could send back to the postal system to get that thing again, right? जैसे कहते हैं ना हमारे दुकान वाले कि हम आपको मंगवा देंगे. So that could really happen with the merchants. Fine. So they could place their order for more things to come in, and if suppose they have to send money to their family or if they have to ask for money, so all that actually became quite easy. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. That is the unique system of communication. So with this, we have finished our discussion of Ibn Battuta. We will be starting with Francois Bernier now. He is the person I warned you about, that you have to be very careful while studying him, because not everyone will present you with an unbiased viewpoint. Okay, so let's talk about him now. If there's anything that you have not understood, you can let me know. The live chat is open, guys. It is open only for you, so that you can let me know if you have any doubts. Alright, let's move ahead and let's talk about Francois Bernier. Now, Francois Bernier, guys, he was a European and he was actually coming from France. Okay. Now, before him also, we have had certain writers. We've had some Portuguese writers like Barbosa, Pays, we have Trevanier as well, we have Manucci and all of these travelers. We will be talking about all of them, don't worry, we will be talking about them in detail actually. So I will be going about the travelers one by one. Fine. So Francois Bernier, he was a Frenchman, he was a doctor, he was a political philosopher, and he was a historian. Obviously a product of the Renaissance man, which I'm sure you're familiar with the concept. If you have done your class 11th history thoroughly, you are familiar with this concept, right? So he had come to the Mughal Empire seeking opportunities. He stayed here for almost 12 years, and he was appointed as the chief physician of the Prince Dara Shikoh. Alright, and he also acted as an intellectual and a scientist with Danishmand Khan, who was an Armenian in the Mughal court. Alright, so what all have we learnt about him? I'll just write it down for you, that's so it becomes easy. He was obviously a French person. He was a French person, a doctor, a philosopher, and a historian. How many years did he spend in the Mughal Empire? 12 years. What did he act here? What did he do here? He was the chief physician, chief doctor you can see, or you can say chief physician of whom? Of Dara Shikoh, and he also acted as a scientist with Danishmand Khan. Okay, alright, so that's about him a little bit. So he was a French person, he was a doctor, a philosopher, a historian. He stayed here for 12 years, stayed in the Mughal Empire for 12 years. He was a chief doctor, chief physician for Dara Shikoh, and obviously he was a scientist with Danishmand Khan. Now whenever we are referring to whatever he is saying, okay, we have to be very, very careful, because we have to understand that, he is coming with an agenda. And what is his agenda? The agenda is to compare the East and the West. Okay, what is his agenda? His agenda is to compare the East and the West. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by comparing the East and the West? So basically he wanted to compare India with France, and particularly wanted to compare India with Europe, particularly France. Fine. And whatever he has written, please, we have to understand that whatever he has written, he is writing for the king, right? His work is being sponsored by the king, so maybe he was bound to do that. Maybe that's what he wanted to do, but yes, that's what he was doing. He was comparing the East and the West. He was comparing our country with his country. Fine. And whatever he has written is frequently comparing the situation in India with whatever he has seen in Europe, and always Europe is better and India is in a deeper, darker space. Okay? Now his major writings were written in the form of letters and were dedicated to the King of France at that point of time. Okay, so it was dedicated to Louis XIV at that point of time. So, and it was written in such a manner that it could be read by official ministers and influential officials. Fine. So maybe he was wanting to impress the king, that is why he wrote so. Maybe that's what his thought process was. We don't really know that for sure, but whatever he has written does tell us about maybe that was his thought process. Fine, so it could be a thing. So all we see is his assessment is not always accurate. So as I told you, we have to be really careful while studying about travelers. They not always do not present an unbiased viewpoint. Sometimes we can have a very biased viewpoint, and that's what we have to be careful about. Alright, so when we take up this topic in the next class, that's what we will be starting with. We will be starting about what Bernier described the situation as and what the situation actually was. Fine, that's how we will be talking about. Okay, so let me know if you have any doubts still here. If there's anything that you have not understood, I will be more than happy to help you here. If there's anything that you have not understood, you can let me know. Alright, so we will end today's lecture here, and before you all leave, I would request everyone to join our Telegram channel, because this is where you will get regular updates regarding the class. Okay, also whatever file that we upload, whatever notes that we have uploaded in the class, you can get the PDF version of that notes in the class itself, in the group itself, so your preparations would never be hampered. You will have access to notes as well. The link is given in the description box. The scan code is also given, so whichever you're comfortable with, you can join the group from here. So it's very important that you become a part of this group, so because it's easier for you to interact with the teachers also. You can always drop in a message and see if you have not understood something. And before you all leave, I would request everyone to like the video, share it with your friends, and do drop us a comment, guys, if there's anything you don't understand. If you're watching the recording and you feel like you don't understand something, you can always drop in a comment and I will take it up in the next class for sure. And if there's something you like, you can let us know. If there's something you don't like, you can let us know, and we will definitely work on it. And most importantly, before you leave, do subscribe to the channel. Press the bell notification so that you get notified whenever we post a new video or whenever we come online. That's very, very, very important. Okay, so do subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for coming to the class. Thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much, guys. It really, really, really means a lot. It was an absolute pleasure to have you all here. In the next class, we will be continuing with Bernier and how we have to be careful about him. I will be telling you a lot about him, about how he compared the East and the West, about how he was hell-bent on private property ownership and how the India did not have that, how his viewpoints have really encouraged economists and European thinkers to come up with different modes of production for us. So all that we will be discussing in detail. So that's about it for today. Thank you so much for coming to the lecture. Thank you so much. See you all. Bye bye.